All right, well, in Their Finest, you've been tasked with playing a vain, shallow ham, as he's been called, Ambrose Hilliard. He's sort of, I guess his journey is that he becomes slightly less absorbed over the course of the film.
Yeah.
There's certain elements that are pressing him to become less self-absorbed, right?
Yeah.
More of a team player.
Yeah.
Can you talk about that development in him?
Well, I think he is vain, plainly he's vain, and he does have, there are elements of his character which would suggest shallowness. I don't think he's a ham, because ham, I think, means bad acting. And I'm not saying because I'm playing it, but I think he takes acting quite seriously. One of the kind of attractive things about him is that he takes acting quite seriously, even though he's self-absorbed, chronically self-absorbed and pompous. But he also, by the end, you see that that he has some sense of his responsibility as an artist in wartime, and that collectively they're involved in something crucial, and which goes beyond his own purposes.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is a. If we could avoid the word arc, I'd be very happy, but I can't. So there is a kind of arc, as you suggest, and he starts off. You just think, well, who is this guy? He's just a 360-degree prick. But then he saves himself to some degree.
Yeah, it seems there's actually sort of three things that work on him. You mentioned two of them. One being Katrin's kind of soft touch with him in appealing to him as an actor, and giving him the chance to dig deep as an actor.
Yeah.
And the war, the influence of the war, and it hitting close to home for him. I think the third perhaps might be that romance seems a possibility for him.
Yes, true. Yeah, there is always that, which is always
takes him a bit out of himself.
Yes, absolutely. Love improves us all. I think it's one of the reasons that people crave romantic love, is because it makes you kind of good, as Lou Reed once remarked. But yeah, so there is that. But I think, I presume that kind of behaviour, when people conduct themselves unattractively, I presume it's born of insecurity and vulnerability. That doesn't make it, and there's no excuse, because everybody's like that, and it's a judgment of character, obviously, but there is something about him that is quite moving. As a result of that, you think, God, you're in so much trouble. And he's also delusional about how old he is. I remember I got a phone call when I was about 39, when my agent said, darling, it's Hamlet, it's Moscow, it's Tokyo, it's an 18-month gig, it's a wonderful opportunity. I said, I don't want to play Hamlet. She said, no, not Hamlet, Claudius. And then you realise you've become Hamlet's uncle. And that's always a bad moment. Which, and because you realise you've been delusional. I'm not going to be playing Hamlet at 39. But, so everybody's capable of a touch of that.
Luckily, our politicians are immune over here.
Well, quite.
He's also been a star of detective films in his heyday. I think those would make an excellent spin-off. I think you should talk to Lona about making one of those.
Inspector Shaun. Yeah, no, I'd love. I do regret that we don't have, because they're kind of B movies, what we used to call B movies, and they would be kind of first on the bill before the main attraction. I quite like the idea of having my own B movie franchise, but I'd love to play a detective. I love looking for clues.
It's sort of an interesting thing in your career after your stage training and coming up in the National Theatre and all of that, that sort of in middle age you became a star of blockbuster films and found yourself in elaborate makeups sometimes, and in a science fiction you've kind of become a cult actor in science fiction films as well. Was that at all a surprise to you when that phase of your career arrived?
Yeah, I mean, everything, it was already a surprise. That was a big surprise. All of those things you mentioned were unexpected. But everything was kind of unexpected. I've never had there's never been a plan. I've improvised my life, which I'm not recommending to anybody, but it's just what I've done.
You don't have a choice.
Well, yeah, I don't have a choice to some degree. I rely on other people. But even when I was younger, I just used to make it up as I went along, and there wasn't in terms of, you try and keep your nose clean in terms of materials. You don't want to be in things that are a nuisance in the world. But yeah, so I was in a movie called Love Actually, which then made me much more castable, more useful around the place, so I could play principal roles in major motion pictures. and I don't mind what genre it is. I'm a sci-fi freak. I read a lot of what they call literature of the imagination, which is probably a preferable term. And I remain a founder member of the Science Fiction Theatre of Liverpool, which produced a production, an 8-hour production of Illuminatus.
Yes, that's right. I read about that.
Exclamation mark! Which was Robert Shea and Robert Anton Wilson, which I'm very proud of. Anyway, I dig that sort of stuff, and I like being a vampire, and I like vampire lore. I like when it gets really stupid, when the werewolves harness daylight in bullet form. Stuff like that.
Oh, we all do. Yeah, and my personal favorite is Florida Bar Fast.
Oh yeah, that's beautiful. I love that.
Sort of an iconic role of science fiction comedy. Anyway, you've said that Lona handed you some, quote unquote, some real gifts.
Yeah.
Could you talk a bit about what some of those were, that things that perhaps maybe not diverted from the script, but added to the script, enhanced?
We didn't, there were no lines that would change too much, I don't think, because I'm lucky that I work at a level of writing generally where they don't need any help from me. And I'm a bigger fan of writing than I am of improvisation. Yeah. And I don't think Lona ever gave me any extra words, but she would give you, I mean, sometimes I'd be fooling around with it, doing it in between takes, doing it in a way that I would think would be never acceptable in the movie itself. And then she'd say, well, why don't you do it like that? So I'd do it like that, and then she'd just laugh, and some of that is in the movie. But she'd give you kind of comic ideas, and she would embolden you. She'd make you brave, and she's very, very smart, and smarter than I am, which is what you require in a director.
You have a particularly notable exit, I think, in the film. It's subtle, but there's a nice flourish to the way you exit the film, your last moment.
Yes, the last scene was written actually after the film had been shot and edited. So they figured they needed that scene for several reasons, as a kind of resolution, and it worked obviously very nicely for my character, because it did indicate that there was something, a degree of depth about it. And and my exit, the shades helped.
Yeah.
The designer, who's a very gifted costume designer, handed me those shades, and I thought, these could be very useful.
Props are always catnip for actors, right?
Yeah.
And costumes. Anyway, though it's infinitely adaptable to a range of characters, you do have a distinctive manner about you and a dry comic sensibility, I think, that collectively feels purely you. So I imagine directors often saying, "Get me Bill Nighy. He's the right guy for this part," though maybe not as many as you would care for. But I'm curious, what were the most formative influences on that personality?
Well, I don't really, because nobody knows themselves, and I don't watch films I'm in, so which I suppose I should really, but so I'm often being told stuff about stuff I've done, which I have no memory of, and I don't really understand what that means. I'm pleased and flattered that there is anything that might be described as my personal, style of delivery or something. I think if, in terms of generally, not to do with acting particularly, but if there is anything if there's one person that informs my style, it's my father. My father, who was a very wonderful and marvellous man, called Alfred Nighy, and he was a very modest and reserved kind of chap, and very kind, but he had a personal style which was he appeared to be very relaxed and kind of laid back. In fact, I think his mind was probably on fire, but and not always in a productive way. But his style icon was Bing Crosby, which involved a cigarette in one hand and a decent sports coat and your hand in your other hand in your pocket, and never to let your pulse rise too high. So he had that kind of laconic sort of delivery, and maybe that's. I often, my mother, sometimes if I had got my hair cut short in the days when everybody had long hair, but if I ever played a role, I went to the Isle of Wight festival with a short back and sides, which meant that, I walked through a crowd of 600,000 people, which parted in front of me as I went around, because they either thought he's a policeman or he's in the army, or he's certainly not desirable. I mean, I don't know what happened to love, peace, and understanding that day. It just went out the window. But if I ever came home with a short haircut, my mother would go and, would leave the room and sit down for a while, because I look so much like my father. And I think that's probably the major influence. I can't think of anyone else because I'm not conscious of it. Oh, Christopher Walken informs my every move. Christopher Walken, Christopher Walken is my hero, and I had the great, deep pleasure and honour of working with him recently in a movie called Turks and Caicos by David Hare, and he was as marvellous as I imagined he would be, and but he is also infectious in terms of style. He's infectious, and I can't actually. Everyone else I know can do a Christopher Walken impersonation. I can't. I'm not much of a mimic. But I find myself doing things sometimes, which, and I think, oh, that's Christopher. And it has been since I was exposed to him, face to face for a while, for a few weeks. He has entered my system. He's entered the language in terms of how I present myself to some degree.
Yeah, and you sing in this film. You two would do a spectacular song and dance duet.
I think I would. You could shoot me. I'd die happy. If I did a song and dance act with Christopher Walken, I think I could ascend to the stars. I'd be very, very happy. I'd be very daunted at the prospect, but I'd give it a shot. I Google Christopher Walken late at night. I Google Christopher Hitchens, Martin Amis, and John Lee Hooker, Van Morrison, Bob Dylan, and Christopher Walken. Those are my regular Googles. And I often Google Pennies from Heaven, the movie where he does a striptease in a bar.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've seen
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
just like pure, sheer talent and great elegance. Everything he does, it's like Michael Jackson. Everything he does is poetic. Every move, every breath, every word is poetic. He can't help it. He's probably, I assume, completely unaware of it, as probably was Michael Jackson. Michael Jackson flicked a wrist and it was poetic. It's one of those people. They're very rare.
Well, I wish I could go on talking with you, but I'm getting the hook here. So it's been a great pleasure speaking with you.
My pleasure. Thank you.